Ready? All right. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all so much for taking time out of your busy days. We know there's a lot going on right now, but we felt that this is definitely something we need to continue to do with these town halls to make sure that we are engaging with the public, to answer any questions, also to gather feedback from you all. That's very, very important to me. It's important to our school board, and it's important to my staff. So how I run my presentations is I want to make sure that this is engaging for you. So I don't want you to just sit and get. I want you to make sure that you are raising hands, asking if you have any feedback or questions. I will continuously, intentionally ask that throughout the presentation. We did something new last session when we were at Sharando, and it actually went very well, where we are live streaming this so that we could engage with more representatives from our community because, again, we understand everybody has busy lives. We get that. So we want to make sure that we are reaching every aspect of our community. So we are live streaming. So all that we ask, if you do have a question or a comment, just raise your hand. We have 2 people on each aisle. They're just going to hand you the microphone. The only reason they have that is so that the folks online can hear the question. Because if you're online and we don't have a microphone, I'll just be standing there not saying anything, and then I'll answer a question, so you can imagine it gets a little frustrating because you don't know what's going on in the live session. So just please make sure you pay attention to that. Also, before we get started, I always like to introduce whenever we have a school board member or board of supervisor. We do have our board chair, Mr. Scott Sturdivant. Thank you so much for being here. Here to support us, and I will let you know if any other board members or board of supervisors come in throughout this presentation. So with that being said, we're going to discuss 3 items for our budget for this evening. And again, if you have any questions throughout this process, please raise your hand. Let us know if you have any feedback. We want to hear from you. It's very, very important that we engage with you. So first, we're going to talk about what is a needs-based budget. Where does this budget start? What goes into that? What are the prongs and the components and the variables of that? And how do we come up with that needs-based budget? Then we're going to discuss what that needs-based budget is, as well as other funds that go into our budget. And then we're going to discuss some timelines. This is a very busy time of year for our school board, our board of supervisors, my staff and I, because there's a lot of meetings that we have. Thank you, everybody, for being flexible. We had to adjust this time for this session because we had a meeting prior to this. So there's a lot going on because there's a lot of variables and input that we are seeking as we move throughout this entire process. So this budget process is a 9-month process. So once the budget has been officially approved, we are then going to give us about 2 or 3 months where we're going to work on some other things, and then we're going to be right back at it starting in August because there's a lot that goes into that budget development. The budget development does not happen in a silo. It doesn't happen just by inventing and creating information and numbers. There's a lot of feedback that I seek from our principals, from our staff, from you, from our students, all the way until this budget is approved, hopefully in April. And I'll talk through what that timeline looks like here in a second. So there's a lot of information that we're gathering. We take a look at our projections. We take a look at our student enrollments. We take a look at projected student enrollments. We look at the needs of our students. There are a multitude of things that we look at whenever we are taking a consideration in regards to the budget that I then propose to our school board. We also take a look at what's happening across the Commonwealth. Looking at other school divisions, looking at a 30-mile radius, looking at other divisions across the state to make sure that we are staying competitive and that we are also taking into consideration how to keep our staff and how to attract new staff. So there's a lot of components and prongs that go into that. Because then, once that budget, that needs-based budget is determined, we then want to make sure that we are sharing it with numerous people, including you. We share it with our school board. We share it with our Board of Supervisors. We had 2 joint work session meetings to work through that with our Board of Supervisors. I'm invited to a meeting on Wednesday evening where we're going to have another work session with our Board of Supervisors. So we're having a lot of conversations before we get to that point, before that budget is approved. And another component of that budget is determined by what is called our school board budget priorities. And these budget priorities are determined in October, November every year, based on whenever that date falls, so that they can vote on those budget priorities, they being the school board, to determine what they want us to take into consideration when we proposed the needs-based budget. So the three areas that our school board wanted us to focus on this year were instructional initiatives, focus on our students, compensation packages, making sure we're staying competitive and keeping staff and attracting staff, and then making sure we are also focusing on our capital assets. And our assets are our buildings, our lighting, our HVAC. We have 21 buildings across Frederick County, and we have to make sure that we are staying up to date on all of those items so that they don't fall and break, which would then cost us more to replace them. So there's some replacement of some items, some fixing of items, and we have to keep up with those. And I will be sharing that list of items with you this evening. So let me pause there. Any questions, comments, reactions? Even if it's just feedback, we want to hear it. Any questions that you might have? Okay, I want to make sure I take those intentional pauses there. Another big piece of this budget is our strategic plan. And developing and creating a strategic plan is very involved. It takes a lot of time engaging with the community, engaging with our staff, engaging with our students, and making sure that we have every aspect of where we want to go and what vision and goals we have, and our school board adopts that. So our current strategic plan is Inspire 2025. You might have heard of that. It's coming to an end here next year, so we're going to be going through that process again. Hopefully you all will be interested in joining us for those conversations. And right now it focuses on these four areas: student success, culture, strategic partnerships, and high-quality staff. And we focus on each of these areas whenever we are developing any sort of restructuring or any sort of moving forward with budget processes and procedures, and making sure we are aligning our goals with the direction that we want to move in as a school division for the best interest of our students. Questions, comments, reactions? Okay. So before I move forward, I want to take a moment to talk about all of the great things that are happening here in Frederick County. We have over 14,000 amazing things happening here in Frederick County, and it involves each and every one of our students. We have a lot of programs that are dedicated to providing students with opportunities and pathways, from students in advanced programs to students that require a little bit additional support in whatever direction they want to go in for the next stage of their careers. But there are numerous opportunities that we provide all students, and we want to continuously provide them with those opportunities so that they are ready for the next stages of their lives once they leave us after 12th grade. And there's a lot that goes into that, to making sure they have all of the skills that they need in regards if they want to go to the military, or if they want to go to the trades, or if they want to go to community college or to college. Whatever it is, we are going to help them get there, and we're going to work with the parents and the families in order to support our students for the next stage of their careers. Now, another aspect of Frederick County that I want to draw your attention to is take a look at the bottom there. We spend a lot of time transporting students, so much it's over 2 million miles that we travel. And that's not just in a 5-year span or a 10-year span, that's in 1 year. We traveled over 2.4 million miles. So talking about those assets, we have to replace those buses, because if we don't replace those buses, we're not going to be able to get our students to school. So those assets that we have to focus on to make sure that we're replacing on a regular basis. We're also a food service. Look how many meals that we are serving. 600,000 breakfasts, 1.5 million lunches we are serving. And again, that's yearly. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. We have phenomenal nutritional staff that put a lot of work and energy to making sure that our students are fed for breakfast and for lunch. And there's a lot of work that goes into that in making sure that the resources are replenished, making sure that we're compensating our staff appropriately. So there's a lot of work that goes into that to make sure that our students have what they need in order to access their learning so that they're able to achieve those goals. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. We're also looking at new ways of meeting the needs of our students, meeting the needs of our community. We're trying to recognize our students for the great things they're doing. We're trying to showcase that as much as we can. We also started something new this year called Transition Day. We received a lot of feedback on that, a lot of positive, a lot of suggestions for some adjustments, but overall it was very positive. And that was the day for Rising rising 6th and rising 9th. It was the day that we built in the beginning of the school year to help students transition into that school year. So again, thinking creatively to help our students, meeting them where they are so that they're able to attain those goals and that we are helping them become successful. Starting a new school year is very stressful, not only for the student, but for the parents. And we want to make sure that we're supporting you in regards to that transition and allowing us to work with your child in a way that we're able them to achieve those goals. So if there's a way to eliminate any of those stressors, we want to be able to do that. So that was something that we started this year. And again, we're always looking at new ways of supporting our needs of our students and meeting the needs of our community in doing so. Questions, comments, or reactions? My microphone peeps are ready to rock if they're needed. All right. Second here. Okay. So with that being said, we also want to acknowledge we have work to do. And in order to meet the needs of our students and address these areas that we need to improve, we have to invest in those improvements. And we want to acknowledge that we have some work to do in these areas. Now, looking at SOL scores, absenteeism, and discipline data, yes, that is not the end-all, be-all for every student. There are students that are making progress in certain areas, and we get that. But this is a big area that we need to make sure that we focus on, because this is what our students are going to need in regards to providing that additional support if they are underperforming in a specific subject area, or if they're not coming to school, or if there is discipline that we need to address. We want to make sure that we're doing that in a way that we're meeting the needs of our students and we're providing our staff with the right resources to do that. And that is going to be number one as we work through this budget process. So I put together some SOL score data here, and as you can see, from 2021 to 21-22 and to 22-23, we are going in the wrong direction in regards to overall scores as a county. And there are a lot of variables to this. Yes, COVID did not do us any favors, and there's some learning loss there. Yes, we are dealing with a teacher shortage, so getting the right folks in front of our students, we want to make sure we continue to do that. But we have work to do to make sure that we are moving that needle in the positive direction, because again, this is part of what we are trying to do to provide our students with a good education. They are able to show that competency through an evaluation, and we want to make sure that they're making those gains in order for them to be successful. And yes, there are other measurements and tools we can look at in regards to growth, but for overall test scores of our students, we have some work to do. The next aspect, sorry, a little bit of delay with my clicker here, chronic absenteeism. We can't teach the students unless they come to school. Now, with chronic absenteeism, this is different than truancy, because there is a state law that we have to follow to make sure students are coming to school, and if they have unexcused absences, there is a process that we must follow. But for chronic absenteeism, this covers excused and unexcused absences. So for example, if you have a student that went on a trip with their parents, or if there's a student who was sick and they were legitimately sick and they missed more than 10% of a school year, we get dinged for this chronic absenteeism. Now, there are some additional things that we are looking at doing, working with the state, where if a student does miss those days, legitimately misses those days, and they show competency and they show mastery in that content, that we can subtract some of those absences so we don't get a ding per se from the state. But as you can see, we were first in our 30-mile radius comparison group, but still at 15%, that's nothing to brag about. And we have some work to do there. And we've acknowledged that, and there are some additional things that we're doing through our Student Services Department, working with our schools to make sure that we are getting students to school so that we're able to meet their needs. Next up is discipline. So this is another indicator that we have to get ahead of, because this does impact student performance and it does impact the overall child. So we want to make sure that we're acknowledging that we are going up in some of these referrals. I broke this down by elementary, middle, and high, which this presentation is online if you want to take a look at it at a later time to break this down a little bit more. But across the board for our behaviors at all three levels, we are seeing a slight uptick there. Now again, there's probably a couple variables here. We can no longer use COVID as an excuse, right? When students were coming back to a full day, 5 days a week, we did feel some of those behaviors of structure and routine. But for students that were not provided that acclimation to school as a kindergartner and they started as a third grader, we might see some behaviors there of getting used to some structure and some routines. So there might be some variables there to take a look at. Also, some of the overcrowding in some of our schools might be a variable there. Not trying to make excuses to this. I'm just trying to say there are some things that we want to take a look at, because I'm sure there's probably some enforcement that we have to take a look, making sure that our teachers have the right resources to combat some of these behaviors that they're seeing in school, and we're providing those right supports to make sure that they're meeting the needs of our students. Because being proactive is how we're going to combat this, and we want to make sure that we have the right supports in place for our students. Let me take a pause there. Questions, comments, reactions to this? And please, if you have anything, please don't hesitate to share. I know we have the microphone coming around, but please don't hesitate to share because I want to hear from you. Okay. Think of anything, please let me know. All right, so now let's dive in to the budget. Let's take a look at the three main funds that we typically request additional dollars for from the locality, and that is our operating fund, our debt service fund, and our capital projects. So first, let's start with the operating fund. So one of the things that I promised when I took this position over a year now, it's hard to believe, I wanted to make sure that we were being extra diligent and being good stewards of our dollar. So I tasked my team with taking a look at all of our line items, all of our current revenues in regards to that cost to continue, to see if there is some room for moving some dollars around where maybe we're not spending on certain line items and shifting it over so we're not requesting additional dollars from the locality. And all the work that our finance department did, we were able to determine that there was $485,000 that we can utilize in a different aspect of our budget. Now, I want to be very clear on this. This isn't because we were hiding money. This isn't because it was just money sitting around and nobody was touching it. That's not what this means. This means that we were able to go through all of our line items and determine maybe from last year to this year we didn't spend those dollars. Or from 2 years to now, we didn't utilize the dollars like we thought we were, so we want to be better stewards of our dollars. So again, we are asking for $485,000 less from the locality for this upcoming budget cycle. And this is something that we're going to continuously do moving forward, so we're being good stewards of our dollar. And there's going to be a couple examples of that where I'm going to share that with you, and this is very, very important that we're upfront with this, because this is something that I promised that we would do. Questions about that?
Unless you're going to take, if you're going to take questions at the end, I'll wait.
No. Yeah, before you came in, I want questions as we go.
Okay. So you found $485,000 that you. Okay. So you found money that you could use elsewhere.
Yes, sir.
Is what you're saying. Have you given any thought to increasing the custodial staff?
Increasing what? I'm sorry.
Custodial staff.
Custodial staff. We'll get to that when we get to staffing standards. Yes, sir.
Then I'll talk to you then.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you, sir. Okay. Any other questions? All right. Sorry, guys. A little bit of a delay with this clicker here. So the number one thing is our students. And our greatest asset to meet the needs of our students is our people. Our budget is 81% staff. 81% of our budget is staff. And we want to make sure that we have the right staff in front of our students, we have the right staff leading our division, because we have 2,500 staff and over 14,000 students. So we want to focus on them, and that is where a lot of our focus is, to meet the needs of increasing test scores, making sure students are coming to school, and make sure that we are decreasing discipline. And this is where it starts. We have to take care of our people. That is so important, and we want to continue to do that. So overall, for percentage increases across the board, and I'm going to break these down for you, we had 6.6% for teachers, 6.6% for classified, and that is our custodial workers, bus drivers, our instructional assistants, so on. Looking at other professionals was 5%, and then all administrators and supervisors was 3.2%. That is not saying that each of these positions are more important than the other. It's not what this is saying. And I'm going to break it down why these percentages were different across the board, because we had to prioritize some of the areas that we needed to see improvement in regards to compensation and pay scales for our staff. So first, let's break down teachers. So we started with a 3.2 COLA across the board. And that's a cost of living adjustment, and that is not a number that we just made up. That is, the Social Security Administration comes out with that number every year, and that was a dollar amount that we started with. So we started at that number with our teachers, and then we also identified some unclustering that needed to take place with some of our pay scales. And that clustering happened for a multitude of reasons. First, we had a recession back in 2009, 2010. And then, of course, as we went throughout the years, there were some years that we received money to give our staff increases, and there were other years that we weren't. So in order to combat that, we had to cluster some of these scales. Now, we've done a lot of work to fix them, but we still have a lot of work to do. So that is where we get that additional dollar amount there. We are also taking a look, and I'm going to break this down for you in a second here, is the starting salaries for our new teachers. We are noticing, as I mentioned earlier, about comparing against our competitive neighboring school divisions within a 30-mile radius, and we are falling behind in regards to those competitive starting salaries. So we want to increase that so we continue to stay competitive. So with all of that, it is an average of a 6.6% increase for our teachers. Please stop me if I have any questions. And ladies, if a hand goes up while I'm talking, just please. Oh, we got one down here.
Thank you. I saw that SB 104, the bill in the General Assembly right now, has passed both the House and the Senate, and it's just waiting for the governor's signature. How would that bill affect the teacher raise and staff raise there?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple bills right now that are on the floor that are taking into consideration increasing the SOQs, which would help us get additional dollars, taking a look at the pay scales of some of teachers. So I'm going to break that down. I have a slide that has a breakdown of all the budgets. And I want to kind of go through that because where we stand right now is the House and the Senate, they should be voting on that hopefully this week. And then the governor will then approve that in April. So we're hopeful that that timeline stays where it should be, because if not, it'll push, and then we'll be continuously guessing on what we're going to receive. But thank you for that, Brian. I will definitely break that down for you here in a second. Great question. Okay. Anything else? So you keep hearing me mention the 30-mile radius, and we take a look at the schools that are around us within a 30-mile radius. We also get a lot of questions as why we include Loudoun on there. If they make so much more than us, and are able to pay their teachers so much more, why do we include them? Well, we include them because we're losing staff to them. We have staff that are explicitly saying, I'm going to Loudoun to make X number of more dollars. We are not going to be able to catch Loudoun until they change that funding formula at the state level. There's something called a COCA line, C-O-C-A. I advise you to definitely look that up and take a look at it, but there is an imaginary line that literally splits Northern Virginia from the rest of Virginia. And it's to help with the urban development in that part of the Commonwealth, and there's additional dollars that go towards the school divisions in that region. Prince William, Loudoun, Alexandria, Arlington, where a lot of teachers go to make more money. So we're not going to be able to compete with that, but we're going to do our best we can to compress the scales as much as we can so that we can stay competitive and that we keep teachers here in Frederick County, because this is a great place to be. And we just have to make sure that our teachers and all of our staff are able to make a honest living. So when you look at this, we have the 30-mile group, and we catch it at year 35. So that really doesn't do us any favor. So we have work to do. We want to continue to compress, and we want to continue to stay competitive with those neighboring divisions. Here's a breakdown of the starting salaries. As you can see, 2 years ago to last year, we went down. So that's something that we want to stay focused on, because every other division that's on here and in Virginia is having the same conversations that we're having. So we want to make sure that we're staying competitive to keep our teachers, to keep our staff, so that we can continue to meet the needs of our students. So we definitely want to make sure that we are staying competitive here. And that is why we made the recommendation to increase to $52,000. Pause there. Any questions? Next is our classified staff. And as I mentioned to you, all 2,500 staff are an integral part of our school division. Doesn't matter if you're a principal, if you are a custodian, if you're an instructional aide, if you're a teacher, everybody plays a part in this amazing school division to meet the needs of all of our students. And our classified staff, which is our bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians, what we are noticing is we're not only losing some of them to neighboring divisions, we're also losing them to retail. So we need to make sure that we are staying competitive so that we're not losing these great staff to our retail competitors. So we wanted to make sure that we stuck with that 6.6% increase for them as well. So we started with the 3.2, we added on those additional dollars again so that we can stay competitive and keep our classified staff here and attract our classified staff. Very, very important to us. It's thinking. Other professionals, these are going to be our diagnosticians, our psychologists. We started with the 3.2, and then we wanted to focus on these other groups here so that we could provide some additional adjustment to those positions because some of these positions are hard to fill. So we wanted to make sure that we stayed competitive comparing against our other neighboring school divisions. So that's where we got the 5% increase across our average for our other professionals. And then last but not least are our administrators. Again, they are not less important than anybody else. We started with that 3.2%. There is going to be some work that we will have to do in the coming years because we are falling slightly behind when you compare ourselves to the neighboring divisions. But again, we really wanted to focus on our teachers and our classified staff because we have a lot of work to do there, and there is some work that we need to do with those pay scales, and then we will take a look at administrators in future years. So 3.2 average for our administrators. We also wanted to get creative with how we are keeping our staff. And we wanted to take a look at what our teachers currently receive in regards to certain incentives, as well as our classified staff. So first is we wanted to honor those years of experience for our teachers. So we want to get to 15 years to provide that additional incentive. But in order to get to that point, we're going to phase in some components of this budget because we got to think 5 and 10 years down the road. So we're starting with 25 years experience, and this will be built into their salary. So it won't be a stipend, this will actually be built into their salary. We also have identified some hard-to-fill positions. Now, a lot of these positions naturally are special education and are specialized positions, but we do have general education teachers and other positions that are hard to fill, and that could change every year. So we wanted to start at a $2,000 sign-on bonus for these teachers and staff to make sure, again, that we're attracting those teachers so that we can fill these hard-to-fill positions. And again, this is a starting point for us. Questions? Next up is when I met with our principals back in September, October, they shared a lot of concerns with finding substitutes. And they're running into a lot of issues with they actually having to sub in some classes. And that's not something that we want to make sure we get into a habit of doing because that principal administrators, they oversee the overall activities of that building. So we've done a couple things before this budget cycle. We added on one full-time substitute position at every building, and we're slowly hiring those positions. We also started something called Premium Fridays. If anyone in here uses Uber, Monday through Thursday, it's going to be a certain dollar amount, but Friday when it's busier, it's going to be a little bit more. So we do have some staff that take off those days for certain reasons, so we wanted to add those Premium Fridays so that we're able to fill those positions. So we're also going to increase the daily sub rate as part of this budget cycle to, again, hopefully attract more folks to come in and help us out when we need substitutes. We also, in regards to our classified staff, we're recognizing that we have hard-to-fill bus driver positions, so we wanted to increase that attendance bonus for our bus drivers so that we can keep those bus drivers and attract new drivers as well. In addition, they're also part of that classified salary increase. This is in addition to that. Okay. Questions? Okay. Next up, so kind of the gentleman over here asked about the state budget. So let me dive into that a little bit because it'll help provide context to this. So every year, the governor puts together a budget. And in the first year of a biennium budget, because he puts together a 2-year budget, he proposes what he wants to go into that biennium budget. It gets passed back and forth from the House and the Senate. They approve it, and it comes back to him for approval. On the second year of the biennium budget, he can make amendments, so there still is conversations in December and January where they make those adjustments. Well, this year is the first year of another biennium budget. And in that biennium budget from the governor, there was a 1% bonus only, not salary increase, but a bonus for all staff in public education for the first year of his biennium. And then in the second year of the biennium was a 2% pay increase for all staff, all public educators. So it went over to the House and the Senate, and they are now going back and forth. And right now where we stand, somebody knock on wood for us, it looks like there is going to be some additional dollars that we are going to be receiving from the state, which will be good for us because then that means there will be less money that we can request from the locality to go into operating. It also means that this will more than likely go away. There was a lot of angst about this to begin with because it wasn't going into salaries. It was only going as a bonus. Now, we're going to take it if the state gives it to us, of course. We're not going to be non-appreciative, but it's better to get the money to go toward your salary because then that goes towards your retirement and goes into teacher salaries. So we wanted to make sure that we clarified that because there is going to be some adjustments that we're going to be taking a look at. As I mentioned, I have a conversation with the Board of Supervisors Wednesday. The House and the Senate should hopefully, the General Assembly, should have everything determined by this week, and then the governor will sign off on that in April. So we'll have a better idea of what that's going to look like. And right now, the House and the Senate are proposing more money for us, so we're thinking that it'll kind of be right in the middle. Fingers crossed. Okay, so next up, it'll get to answer your question, sir. One of the things that we wanted to make sure we were doing a better job of in regards to being better stewards of our dollar is having some sort of structure in regards to how positions were being added to the building level. So what we created was something called a staffing standard. And what these staffing standards determined is based on the population of that school and the needs of that school determined what level and number of staff you receive in that particular school. And we recognized that across the board, we had some areas for improvement. It's not that we didn't need those positions. We just had to shift those around, but we also need additional staff that we are going to be requesting. And this is going to be phased in because this will take us some time to get to because we have fallen behind in regards to providing staff in our buildings. We're not violating any state codes, but the state does not do us any favors when it comes to how we staff our classrooms and meeting the needs of our 21st century students. For example, there's a state code, a state SOQ that says 1 to 24 for our kindergarten classes. That is a lot of students in a kindergarten class. We're right now about 1 to 18, 1 to 19, and there's a lot of research that supports the less students in a kindergarten class, the more conducive it is for learning in that particular classroom. So we want to establish those local staffing standards for us so that we can determine what those positions are in those particular schools. So as the gentleman mentioned in the back there, we do have an issue with some of our classified staff, and the example that I've used in many different examples, and I'm glad that you're here because I use this example every time. When you take a look at Sharando and compare them to the other two high schools, they have the same number of custodians. Well, Sharando has 350 more students. So we need to do better with balancing that, and we need to get to a point where we were adding those staff based on the number of kids and the needs, rather just on adding positions as we see fit. So we are getting to that point. For this year, we wanted to focus on getting staff in front of students, and then we are going to work in every other aspect of that staffing standard. So we met with all of our principals after we developed those staffing standards that we shared with our school board, and we determined that we needed 42 positions for FTE requests across all of our sites. But pay attention to this middle column here. Again, we want to be transparent, making sure that we're being good stewards of our dollar. We could have just went across the street and said we need 42 positions, but we recognized that we had some positions that we were over in some of these staffing standards. So we were able to move these positions around to meet the needs here and determine we only need 25 positions. Now, a couple questions that came up the last session, which were great questions, is what if a classroom's identified staffing standard was 1 to 19 and it's 1 to 18 right now? We're probably not going to move any positions around because more than likely it'll get to that 19th student. We're talking about areas where there was some significant gaps in regards to those ratios to make sure that we are getting those positions. And part of those conversations is custodians, because we have recognized across the division that there is some disparities in regards to some custodians in some of our buildings, Sharando being one of them. So we are looking into that. That doesn't answer your question. Okay.
What standards did you use at obtaining how many square feet per custodian? How many square feet can a custodian clean in an 8-hour shift? Where did you find numbers for that? Did you use the APPA, the Association for Physical Plant Administrators?
So we collaborated with our facilities office to determine what that number needs to be. And if that number needs to be adjusted or shifted, we're more than happy to have those conversations.
Well, I'm going to hand you a sheet of paper. I'm not going to read it out loud.
Okay.
And this is from the Association of Physical Plant Administrators on the number of square footage and what level of cleanliness that represents.
Fantastic. Okay.
And this ain't about me and this ain't about custodians. This is about students.
Sure.
But if you look at number 4, that's where Sharando is. Actually, we're probably closer to 5.
Okay.
I
So
don't want to make that public. You're welcome to.
no. This is the whole reason. First off, thank you. The whole reason that we have these meetings is to get feedback and input. There's no secrets. There's nothing we're hiding. We want to be open in regards to how we are staffing our schools. We want to be open with how we're meeting the needs of our students. We want to be open with how we're providing our staff with a living. We get that, and we want to get better at that. But there's a lot of work that goes into this. There's a lot of prioritizing. That's why I said earlier, you're no more important than a principal, and a principal's no more important than you. All of our staff are important. And if there's things that we need to do better on, we want to do that. So thank you for sharing that. Definitely something we can look into. And to go back to your point, that's why we develop these staffing standards, to make sure that we are not under-supporting a building or our students, because at the end of the day, that is what it's about. It's about our kids. Number one, every decision we make up here, every conversation we had, every conversation we have on our board is about our students. That is what we need to be about in getting what they need. So if there's areas of improvement, we need to do that. Yes, hand right here. Thank you for that, sir.
The reallocation column, does that mean that certain staff are going to be asked to change locations in the coming year?
Great question. Great question. So we want to avoid moving people. That's one of the things that we want to avoid. So for the majority of these positions, we're actually moving FTEs, because every year, just because of attrition and other things that happen, we are going to have vacancies. So before we fill a vacancy, we are going to move it if it was scheduled to move. Now, if there is a situation that we have to move somebody, it is something that we have done before. It's not pleasant. We get that. We try to avoid it. But in some instances, we might. But in the majority of them, we will not have to do that, just based on the nature of hiring and filling positions. Great question. Okay. Anything else? Fantastic. So as I mentioned, 25 additional positions here. If there is any sort of less money that we are receiving and we have to pivot, the positions that we cannot come off of are these two right here, because these are based on state SOQs and state requirements. So we would have to find other ways to meet the needs of these particular situations, but we can't come off of these here. Hopefully that doesn't happen, because again, we've identified this as being needs, but when it comes to state versus local, there is going to be some conversations we need to have with funding. Okay? Questions? Take those intentional pauses. Thanks for the feedback and questions, everybody. This is great. Talking about pathways, one of the things that we have to do better with is making sure we're catching those students that are not able to have access to a certain program or not graduating, and we wanted to create a night school for some of those students and circumstances. We have students that are supporting a family. We have students that are supporting their parents and they have to work during the day. We have some situations where we have new mothers where they're not able to get those final couple credits. So we want to create a new program, a hybrid night school that these students have access to so they can get those credits and they can graduate, because that is what we are about. We had about 66 students last year that did not graduate because they weren't able to obtain a certain credit, and this will reduce that number so we give them those opportunities so they have those pathways. This is one step of many things that we're trying to do over at Dal J so that we can rename that and give it the better name that it needs to be in providing pathways for students. So there's going to be some additional things that we're going to do over there of providing opportunities for students. Because it's more than just an alternative ed program, we have CT opportunities for all students over there as well. So we're looking at adding and expanding on that. Next up, which is very important to me, is safety and security. And this is something that definitely keeps me up at night. We want to make sure that we're keeping our students safe, our staff safe, and we have the right structures and supports in place to prevent something like that from happening or to triage something that does happen, which hopefully we never have that happen here in Frederick County. So with that being said, we had hired we added a safety and security administrator in central office that oversees that. Former police officer, Mr. Tim Conlon. He's fantastic, and he works on assessing our buildings to make sure they have the right safety features, they have the right things that we might not think about, and he's helping us identify those areas. Now, anything that's an emergency, we're not waiting for additional dollars. We are fixing those right away. I want to make sure that we're very clear on that. These are additional things that would definitely we would definitely want to make sure that we're addressing some of these areas, intruder locks, and replacing certain cameras. And then we're going to continuously grow, because if Mr. Conlon can have his way, this number would be a lot higher. But again, we're trying to progressively move towards that. And thank you to the school board. They actually added some additional money to my initial needs-based budget to get to $200,000. So there's definitely some more work to do in this area. We also are very blessed to have phenomenal SROs in all of our schools, school resource officers, and we want to make sure that we are, again, meeting our safety and security needs so that we're providing a safe environment for our students and our staff. Questions on that? Okay. Next up is transportation. As we've spoke about, we have a lot of miles that our buses travel every year. So we have to get into a healthy replacement schedule for our buses. Right now we have 6 buses built into our operating budget that we replace every year. We wanted to add 2 buses, but thanks to our school board, they added 1 additional, so now we're at 9. We identified that 13 is a good number we need to get to, so we're getting closer to that number to replace buses every year. So right now we are at 3 additional, so that would be 9 every year. So that was additional buses that we'll add into the operating budget. Another topic that has come up quite frequently is the CEP. That is the Community Eligibility Provision. So let me start a little bit further back before we talk about the CEP. And for students, actually, let me back up even further. So part of state code, rightfully so, we have to provide a meal for students, right? Doesn't mean that we have to give it to them for free, but we have to provide it. So we have breakfast and we have lunch available for students to purchase. Part of federal code and a federal process, there is free and reduced lunch for those students to access. So if a student, based on how much money their parents make and they meet a certain criteria, they can get a reduced cost lunch or they can get a free lunch. As a county, we are 40% free and reduced, 40% as a whole. Well, the federal government also came out back in 2014 with a community eligibility provision program. And essentially what this says is if you meet a certain percentage, and at the time was 40%, if you meet that percentage as an individual school, your school qualifies for something called CEP, meaning that regardless if you're free and reduced, you have access to a free breakfast and a free lunch. So we had 3 schools last year. This year, because they met that cutoff of 40%, we have 9 schools. And in October, they shifted that from 40% to 25%. So we meet that as a county. But the one thing to remember is our operating fund for nutrition needs to be replenished. Okay, our cafeteria workers aren't going to work for free. The food isn't going to buy itself. So we have to replenish that. Part of this program is we get reimbursement dollars from the federal government. But we don't get enough reimbursement dollars to make sure that fund stays fully funded so that we can continue to operate. Because right now, of the 12 schools that are not CEP, they are relying on the students to purchase breakfast and to purchase lunch. What this is not saying, and I'm going to give you some numbers here, what this is not saying is we're not making 14,000 breakfasts and lunches every day, and for the students that don't eat, we throw all the food out. That's not what this is saying. What this is saying is we have a formula, because our cafeteria and nutritional staff do a phenomenal job of determining how many students are going to eat breakfast and lunch every day. And right now, on average, of those 9 schools, we're at about 60%. So those 9 schools, any student, regardless of they're free and reduced or not, can have access to a free breakfast and lunch. Any student. And with that current provision in place at those 9 schools, only 60% of the students are participating. For numerous reasons. Families don't want to participate because they know they can afford it. That's fine. Some families, their student has allergies. Whatever the reason is, those students are able to eat and they bring their breakfast and their lunch, or they eat breakfast before they come to school, whatever that is. So we initially proposed that we would go from 9 schools to 21, and we fielded a lot of questions. I would advise you to go take a look at the conversations that were being had, and we determined that we would just move forward. Sorry, this is taking time to go forward, with just those 9 schools. So we're going to continue at those 9 schools. As you can see, there still is a price tag of $1 million because we have to fund that nutritional fund, and we will just continue to have conversations of potentially expanding that to more schools in the future. So we're going to stick with those 9 schools. We're going to continue to fund it. That's the initial proposal there, and we'll have future conversations to hopefully add those additional schools. When we looked at during the COVID time period, because during COVID, breakfast and lunch was provided by the state. They paid us for that. They reimbursed us for that. And even then, when all breakfast and lunch was available to all students, we were still at about 60% average. Some schools were a little higher, some schools were a little lower. But right across the board, not every student was accessing that. Okay? I know there's been a lot of talk about that. If you pay attention to the papers and our meetings, there's been a lot of conversation about this. Any questions? Okay. All right, so back again to the gentleman's question over here. We get 2 main revenue streams to fund our school system. And those 2 main ones are the state and the locality. And every year, as I mentioned, it gets determined by whatever the governor's budget and the General Assembly agrees to in regards to money we receive. And then for anything over, based on what we're trying to do as a school division, based on everything that I started this conversation with, we add or we request additional money from the locality. Federal dollars, that fluctuates because that's based on federal programs that are available. As you can see, we're reducing money there because we're losing those COVID dollars because that's expiring. So we are utilizing those monies. That's not being replaced. And then fees would be if we say rented out Millbrook for a wrestling tournament that was not affiliated to the school, we get dollars for that, or if there's an insurance claim. So that's $1 million is probably a lot to all of us in this room, but in the grand scheme of things, it is not a large dollar amount, but it's still revenue that we take into account. So right now where we stand, we are requesting $7 million from that county transfer. Now back again to the gentleman's question over here, say if the state gives us $4 million, so right up here at the top, say this goes from 10 to 14, then we would, this would get reduced. We would ask that maybe we can use those monies for something else, which I'm going to get to here in a second, or they might say, nope, you get the 4 additional for whatever your operating is, and we're going to keep this money for something else. That potentially could happen as well. But what we're currently in conversations about and what we would like to utilize those dollars for, I'll come back to that debt service here in a second, is our capital projects. And we have not received full funding for these capital projects. And this list, as you can imagine, grows when you don't address it. Now, thanks to our Board of Supervisors and our school board for allowing us to spend surplus dollars and additional state dollars that we received this past year to chisel away at some of these items on this list. But as you can see over here to the right, we have some items on here that have been there for quite some time, and we're at $19 million. And there's a lot of projects on here that we need to get ahead of and we need to fix. From HVAC to cooling systems, to painting, to stage lighting, to stage sound, and these are things just because of age and wear and tear, we got to replace them. So we are going to make a request to use some of that overage of dollars to go towards this, and that is what our current conversations are in right now. So we'll see where that lands. So I would urge you to pay attention to Board of Supervisors and our school board meetings, but that's essentially what we're currently looking at. Let me go back here as I promised. We also have 2 projects that we're still working on, Indian Hollow, which just wrapped up and finished, and James Wood High School. And whenever we borrow money for big CIP projects, we don't take all the money out at once. We take it out based on where we're at with the stage of that project, and then we pay it off within a 20-year span, so that we're not taking out $150 million and putting that burden all in the community in 1 year. We acknowledge the fact that there is a burden that this puts on the community, so it needs to be alleviated as much as possible. We get that. So since we are taking out additional dollars from 24 to 25 to work on James Wood, we are asking for an additional increase of $2.3 million from the locality. We don't hold the debt, we pay the debt, sorry. We pay the debt. Okay, so we work with the locality of paying this off. Questions on that? Now it wants to go too fast. All right. So timeline. As I mentioned to you all, I present my needs-based budget with everything that I took into consideration in January. We have numerous meetings, work sessions. We work through all those pieces. And then in February, which happened a week and a half ago, our school board adopted my needs-based budget. And the adjustments that they made was they reduced the original proposal of 21 CEP schools to 9. They added 1 additional school bus and $100,000 to safety and security. So that was adopted, so now it is their budget, their adopted budget. We had a meeting with the Board of Supervisors where I presented that budget that the board had adopted. Then on April 10th, the Board of Supervisors, hopefully to keep us moving forward and we gain momentum, will vote on our budget on April 10th. And also, hopefully, we will know, based on where the state lands with their budget, about how much money we will receive. Now, based on when that happens, different things potentially can happen with where the budget lands. So say if the governor doesn't sign off on the budget by April 10th, and the Board of Supervisors approves us for all $7 million. Again, to be transparent and to keep that relationship, if we do get additional dollars from the state, we would then go to the Board of Supervisors and say, hey, we received these additional dollars. We want to have a conversation of how to use this money, or if this is the money that you are taking back because you have a right to do that. And we have that conversation. So it's not like we take the money and say, oh, hope they don't find it. Doesn't work that way. Again, we want to be open and transparent with every step of the process for the budget. Then we will have a work session, regardless, the school board. We'll have a work session on April 11th. We'll talk about the appropriation of dollars that we received, where it needs to go, if there's additional things we want to take into consideration. And then on April 16th is our board meeting in April, where they will approve the budget. So adopt in February, approve in April, so that we can start working on getting contracts out, working through our staffing standards, and every other aspect of the budget. All right, so with that, I want to thank you. I want to stick around for any questions that you might have, any additional reactions or comments. As I mentioned to you all, engaging with you all is very important to me, and if you have questions even after this meeting, just reach out, send me an email, and more than happy to answer your questions. So, other feedback, questions, comments? Oh, yes, got one over here, please. Hello.
So I don't know if you remember, but we spoke at the school board about recycling in December.
Yes.
So I was just curious, like, I know obviously you have a lot on your hands here with all this, but I was just wondering if you were taking recycling, like a recycling program, into consideration in the budget, or like what the deal is with that.
Yes, I do remember you. Thank you. So after you presented to the school board, which you did a great job, I worked with my team, and we're currently gathering some information in regards to how we can make that happen, because there is going to be some implications there. There's going to be some logistics in regards to custodial staff. There's going to be some logistics in regards to where's the recycling go. It's not just about recycling. We have to think through all of those pieces. So we're currently putting some things together with our facility services, and then we are going to go from there. So yes, it's still on our agenda to take a look at, and you did a phenomenal job, and we can definitely continue to stay in touch with you as well. Great work. You missed anything? You good? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Have a great night. I'm going to stick around, not running out the door, so if you have anything else that you want to share, just come on up. And thank you again so much, and I hope you all have a great, great evening. Thank you.